Good evening and welcome to the Kennedy Center. My name is Deborah Rutter and I have the distinct privilege of being the president of the John F. Kennedy Center. So welcome, thank you for being with us. We are delighted to have you here for our second ever Sound Health, Music and the Brain. This event is a one-of-a-kind, only happening here tonight. It's going to be a happening, I promise you. Very special, and you are helping make it special. So thank you all for being here to celebrate with us. A couple of years ago, when Renee Fleming became the Kennedy Center's artistic advisor at large, she had this idea that we really should explore what it can mean to think about music and the brain, health and wellness, and what has evolved over a long series of conversations, and now a very, very special relationship. We are here tonight for our second ever Sound Health. So I'd like to pass it off now to Renee. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you. I'm so glad you're all here. Oh my gosh, and did it rain a little? I heard there was some rain. So what has transpired since Francis Collins and I met at a famous dinner party with the National Institutes of Health is a project that is so near and dear to my heart. The NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts, is also involved. It's a pathway towards understanding music's therapeutic potential and growing scientific evidence as to why support for arts education for our children maximizes their potential and our next generation.
So at the NIH, we have a mission to seek fundamental knowledge about nature and behavior of living systems, but to apply that knowledge to enhance health, to lengthen life, to reduce illness and disability. That's our mission. Recent research suggests that music has been a fundamental part of human evolution. The regions of the brain have apparently evolved to respond differently and specifically to music. When you listen to music, a slightly different part of your brain responds compared to what happens if you're listening to language or to street noise. If you look at that picture, you'll see a subtle difference between the speech-selective part of the auditory cortex and the music-selective part. It must be there for a reason, and it must have been there for a long time. Maybe we can learn better how to tap into that to bring even more exciting promise to the inspiring field of music therapy. But music doesn't just enter your brain and get digitized into some bland firing of neurons. It has the power to move all of us. Have you ever had the experience of listening to a piece of music that literally gave you chills? Well, check out this image. There on the right is what you see in a scan of somebody who's listening to music that made them have those chills. They're releasing a whole lot of dopamine in the ventral striatum, which is a cool thing for a neuroscientist. See, these modern methods of brain imaging, we're beginning to learn that not only tonality, but rhythm alone can have profound effects on the brain of a listener. This begs the question of whether music and rhythm, with this apparently privileged access to the brain and its ability to move us emotionally, could be used even more effectively therapeutically as well. And we're seeing some pretty interesting examples. Here is one. Look at this clip. On the left, you see a gentleman with Parkinson's disease. The typical difficulty in walking, the shuffling gait. Notice when he gets to the far end there and turns around and tries to walk back. It's really hard to get started again. That's part of the effects of Parkinson's disease. Imagine how frustrating that is for an affected person. But now look and see what happens if he does the same task with a metronome, basically keeping a beat. That's all that's different here. See, his path is very smooth. He turns around, he doesn't pause, he just keeps on going. Just the effect of a beat synchronizing with his brain in a way that gets him past what otherwise a difficult problem. So at NIH, we're really interested in understanding how just a simple beat like this can result in such dramatic improvement in symptoms for this man, and how interventions using music or components of music can be used for a whole host of indications, from autism to chronic pain to stroke to Alzheimer's disease. In fact, I am very proud to tell you tonight that NIH has just announced a new program in collaboration with the National Endowment of the Arts of up to $5 million to support further research into how music interacts with the brain. Woo!
Thank you. Thank you.
And we are going to find out how that knowledge can be applied to improve health and well-being. Tonight and tomorrow, if you come to the workshops, you'll get a glimpse of what lies ahead at the intersection of music and neuroscience. You'll be hearing more about where music comes from and how components of music, including rhythm, interact with our brains and even act to shape our brains in important ways during childhood. So there's never been a better time for bringing music and neuroscience together. So please, sit back. We're not over-rehearsed. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Any other day, you would come my way and say to me, do you have the time? Thought that it was right beside me, but lately it's
Good evening, everybody. I'm Sanjay Gupta, and this, of course, is the extraordinary Renee Fleming.
You know, I got to tell you, Madison McFerrin, this is just so amazing to me, created all of that on stage in real time. Nothing was taped. Those were all, each sample she made with her voice. So talk about another great use of the voice, right?
That's a lot to talk about tonight. You look fantastic. You look lovely.
Oh, thank you, Sanjay. So
I don't think
you.
I could have pulled off the cape, though, necessarily.
Yeah,
I do like that.
Well, I don't know. So I'm going for the brain. So this is cerebral cortex, right? A little bit of the brain folds.
I feel
always
smarter
wanted to
just
be
standing
one.
next to you. Yes.
Thank you.
I got to say as well, Renee, before we get started, I think myself, like probably everyone in this room, watched you at Senator McCain's funeral.
Yeah.
It was very touching. I think it was beautiful. Obviously, what was it like for you?
Well, it tells us and shows us once again that music can be a unifying force in times of tragedy. And in this case, of course, you know, the emotional pull and draw on that particular moment. And of course, it was Senator McCain himself who asked for that song. I've never received so much response to anything I've ever done. It was powerful this past week. So thank you. Anyway, thank you so much, Sanjay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I am really honored to be here, very excited to be here. This is going to be a great evening. We are all musical beings. We have been musical beings for longer than we even know, before we even began to record our collective human history. Archaeologists have found flutes made from bird bones and mammoth ivory, which carbon dating has shown to be between 42 and 43,000 years old.
Sanjay, I remember being shocked when I talked to scientists about how long music has been a part of human life. In fact, according to Ani Patel, when scientists studied the bone flute, they observed that it probably wasn't a new invention. And the bone flute is around 5,000 years older than cave paintings. And before the bone flute, there was the human voice, which leaves no trace. Musical behavior is probably much older than we think.
No doubt. We know that 43,000 years is a long time. But we thought we would give you a little chance to visualize what that means about how long music has been before us, even before Mozart wrote his classic opera. Help me out here.
Yeah, Die Zauberflöte.
Die Zauberflöte. There we go.
Happy to help.
Thank you very much. The Magic Flute.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very nice. I think I should have flute playing all the time when I'm speaking on stage. It's really, really nice and
No,
soothing.
soprano. You need that.
It's a long time ago, as we're talking about the beginning of music. So imagine it like this. Imagine time as the Washington Monument, with each foot standing for 100 years. So if the bone flute was made roughly 43,000 years ago, which is here at the base of the obelisk, it would take until we went up about 427 feet before the magic flute was composed by Wolfgang Amadeus in 1791. Since then, all the music that's happened to us, from Beethoven to the Beatles and beyond, has taken place in those remaining roughly 30 feet. We haven't yet even made it to the observation deck at 500 feet. The point being, music is really, really old.
So the word music dates to probably the 13th century BC, musica, and derives from the Greek musa, which translates to muse. In ancient Greek mythology, there were 9 muses, the goddesses who held sway over the arts and the sciences. And I'm quite certain that the ancient Greeks would appreciate our efforts tonight to unite the arts and sciences and to explore a fundamental question of our unique species. Why are we musical? And what connection does music have to the mind?
That's why I'm here, to get the answer to that question.
Thank you.
You know, the great neurologist, author, and my friend, Dr. Oliver Sacks, once said, "The brain is more than an assemblage of autonomous modules, each crucial for a specific mental function. every one of these functionally specialized areas must interact with dozens or even hundreds of others, their total integration creating something like a vastly complicated orchestra with thousands of instruments, an orchestra that conducts itself with an ever-changing score and repertoire. And when we're making music, this brain orchestra is playing with full gusto and using every possible instrument, even the triangle. Even the flute. No, I'm kidding. Research has shown that music is one of the most cognitively demanding tasks we can undertake. Think about that. And when I think of a brain like an orchestra, there is one artist that comes to mind.
Yes, my colleague here at the Kennedy Center. He's a pianist, educator, composer, and film composer. Please welcome jazz great Jason Moran. So we're fortunate now to hear him play his own composition, Reanimation.
Good evening. My name is Laurel Traynor, and I'm a professor of psychology, neuroscience, and behavior at McMaster University. And for 25 years, I've directed the Auditory Development Lab, where we study how the brains of infants and children perceive sound, and how the brain changes as children acquire language and music. We also study the brains of musicians, and we look at how skilled musicians make music together, how their brains enable them to do that. Now, you heard a little bit about evolution already, but in evolution, long before music appeared in humans, the hearing sense evolved. Indeed, the adaptive pressures that evolved our exquisite ability to hear were similar across all of these species going back 500 million years. Basically, all of these species use sound to identify and locate objects of importance to them in the world, such as food and predators. But this is actually a difficult problem. And here's why. At any one time, there are many objects in the world that emit sound. So in the modern environment, you might have a baby crying, a police car siren, people talking, a dog barking, and so on. And all of these sound waves sum in the air and produce one complex waveform in which it's hard to tell what part belonged to what object. The complex wave reaches your ear, and the information is transmitted to the auditory cortex in the brain. So the brain needs to break down this complex waveform into the sounds that represent each of the objects in the environment. Turns out this is not so easy, and it has baffled artificial intelligence researchers for a long time. But the brains of many species can do this. And it was this evolution that gave us the ability to perceive pitch and the ability to perceive rhythm. But in humans, unlike most, if not all other species, we used our big brains and our ability to play with pitch and rhythm to develop music, and to harness music to communicate emotion, to connect with other people, to increase social cooperation. Indeed, we are a very social species. As an example, there are some 200 or 2,000 of you here tonight to experience this event together. It has been argued that our superior ability to cooperate has enabled us to develop cultures and technology that have transformed our lives, and that we can transmit from generation to generation, and that we can improve on from generation to generation. So just look what we can do. Look what we can achieve when we cooperate. Now, our social abilities have also enabled us to be deceptive and to exploit other people to an extent not seen in any other species. Today, it seems that the world is in a state where we need to enhance cooperation if we are to survive. And music might be one element that could help us to do that. So let me explain. Music, as you know, has the power to move us emotionally. It can bring us to tears. Music also has the power to bond us socially. We can listen to music by ourselves, but actively making music with other people has even more powerful effects, whether you are a child or whether you are an adult. Indeed, we have music at parties, at weddings, at funerals, at religious ceremonies, at political rallies, and we have work songs when we need to accomplish something together. Basically, we have music anytime we need to feel something together, feel a common emotion, and work towards a common goal. So we've been asking, just how do people communicate during music making? So I direct the live lab at McMaster University, and this is a 100-seat performance hall equipped with technology to measure brain responses, physiology, movement, in multiple musicians and audience members as they make music together and as they experience music together. So in the Live Lab, we have 28 microphones and 76 loudspeakers that control the sound environment. We can put sensors on the heads of musicians and audience members to measure their EEG brainwaves as they play and as they listen. We also have motion capture. By putting small reflective markers on the bodies of musicians, we can figure out how they move in order to make music. We can measure audience members as well. And we can figure out how they respond to music. So using the motion capture technology in the Live Lab, we examined just how musicians stay together when playing chamber music in order to create a cohesive musical performance as a team. We should note that in chamber music, like this, there's no conductor, so the musicians need to work together to play together. So it's a perfect way to examine how musicians communicate with each other. So we asked the Griffin Trio to come to the Live Lab, and we put motion capture markers on them. We have 18 infrared cameras that bounce light off the markers, and from that we could create three-dimensional representations of the musicians' movements. Okay, so musicians lean and sway their bodies when they play. Did you notice that? They don't need to do this. They don't need to move their bodies in that way to play the notes. But the body sway reflects how they feel and how they intend to express the music. Just the way we gesture with our hands when we talk. Indeed, have you ever noticed it's hard to talk if you stop gesturing? It's also difficult for musicians to play without moving their bodies. So we examined the body sway of each of the three musicians, and we used a mathematical technique called Granger causality to measure communication. So here's the idea. This shows the body sway of one musician over time from left to right. So within this musician, at any point in time, say the point illustrated by the red dot, we can predict pretty well how they're going to move next based on how they just moved, which is shown in yellow. However, if we can make a better prediction of how this musician is going to move next by adding in a second musician and how they just moved, then there's communication from what's shown as musician 1 here to musician 2. And we can examine in this way the communication of every musician to every other musician. And we can look at how much communication there is among all the members of the trio. Okay, so now back to our question of how musicians communicate to create a common musical expression of the group when they play. So we asked the Griffin Trio to play the same piece in two ways, once with expression and once without expression. And here are their motion capture models of them playing the piece in these two versions. I've taken out the sound, so see if you can tell from their body sway alone which is the expressive version that they're playing. Okay, it's pretty obvious, right? It's the one on the right. Now, if we look at our Granger causality measure of communication, we see that they are communicating a lot more through their body movements when they are creating this common musical expression shown in the red. And because body sway reflects what's going on in the brain, and the sounds that the musicians produce. In this way, we can start to understand the exquisite nonverbal communication and mutual influence and cooperation that takes place when people play music together, as you just heard a moment ago from the wonderful musicians on this stage. Now, just how important is musical communication? Yes, wasn't it wonderful? Now, just how important is musical communication for the human species? Is it just some professional musicians like this fellow here? Or is music important to all of us? Well, one very basic aspect of music is rhythm. And when you listen to music with a beat, it makes you want to move to the beat. So why is that? Well, when the human brain, in our studies, we've shown that when the human brain is presented with a rhythm, groups of neurons in the auditory cortex communicate with groups of neurons in the motor cortex. So just listening to a musical rhythm activates the motor cortex and makes you want to move to the beat. So when a simple beat is presented, the neural circuits in the auditory cortex actually entrain to the beat. So in the top graph here, you see a beat that's presented that's fairly fast, and you can see the brain's response increasing and decreasing in time to the beat, as shown by it goes from red to blue to red to blue. That's the brain response increasing and decreasing in time to the beat. Now in the bottom graph, the brain is presented with a slower beat. And again, the brain circuits entrain to the beat. And now if you look at the changes from red to blue to red to blue, they're slower. Again, the brain is entraining to the beat. And one very interesting thing about these oscillations that we can measure in the brain to musical beats is that they occur not only in the auditory cortex, but they occur in regions of the brain that control movement. So hearing a musical rhythm primes the motor cortex and makes you want to move in time to the beat. But think about this. If I move in time to the beat of a piece of music, and you're listening to the same piece of music at the same time, and you move along to its beat, we are going to move in synchrony with each other. So music is a perfect way of synchronizing movements between people. And this has important social consequences. After moving in synchrony with another person, people report liking each other more, trusting each other more, and if you give them a game to play in which they can cooperate or compete, they'll cooperate more. So that's pretty important. But here is something even more amazing. We see these prosocial effects of moving in synchrony to music in infants. So at 14 months, infants' motor systems are not very mature, and they can't really yet synchronize their movements to the beat of music. But we can bounce them to the beat. Indeed, parents around the world do this every day. And this is what we did in the study I'm going to describe next. So in this study, one adult, the one on the right, bounces the infant to a version of Twist and Shout, and the infant faces the person on the left, who is the experimenter. Now the experimenter either bounces, with some infants she bounces in sync with them, but with other infants she bounces at a different tempo, out of sync with them. She follows what's in the click track in her headphones. So after just a couple of minutes of this experience, we see how often an infant will help the experimenter by handing back objects that she accidentally drops. So here's what the synchronous bouncing looks like. Infants love this, by the way. So, does this infant help?
Oh, no. Oopsie. Oh, no.
So this is what asynchronous bouncing looks like. Now, do you think this infant is going to help?
Uh-oh. Oh, no.
Okay, that infant did not help. So less than 3 minutes of synchronous bouncing with an unfamiliar adult significantly increases infants' pro-social helping behavior. And furthermore, if infants are shown that an adult that they bounced in sync with has a friend, they will extend their helping to the friend of the person that they bounced in sync with. That's even more amazing. So this is pretty powerful. Infants use synchronous bouncing to music as a cue to decide who to trust and who to befriend. Around the world, caregivers sing to their infants while holding and rocking them, and infants are responsive to music from a very young age. Indeed, singing to infants has been shown to calm them and keep them happy for longer than even infant-directed speech. We're only beginning to understand the importance of rhythm and music in early development. But what is becoming clear is that deficits in timing and rhythm can lead to significant developmental problems. So indeed, rhythm and timing deficits are associated with virtually all of the major developmental disorders, including dyslexia, autism, attention disorders, developmental coordination disorder, and stuttering. And research is showing that interventions involving musical rhythm can help. Indeed, music therapists observe this firsthand in their daily work. So this scientific research tells us how important music is for optimal social and emotional development. It also speaks to how we may be able to harness music for potential interventions in various developmental disorders. We know that the experiences that children have at very young ages are critical for their development, and it is time to explore further the role that music can play in providing the best start for our youngest citizens. Okay, thank you.
All right, we're back. We're going all the way to the center this time?
Yeah.
Well,
Okay, but we got to just make sure we're in sync, okay? I love that. Oh,
it works. Synchronous bouncing. I feel more bonded to you already.
that's it, for sure. Smiles.
Everyone was
So-
geeking out backstage. It was amazing.
I know, it's true.
And music and the brain, I love that stuff.
Well,
But I'm learning a lot.
good.
How
I'm so
how did you
glad.
get interested in this?
Oh, I adore this. I absolutely love it. First of all, if you're a singer, you have to be interested in mind-body connection because we're utilizing involuntary muscles to do something in a virtuosic level that's really hard.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time and a lot of patience. We all sing, fortunately. So I loved that. And then I noticed that there were all these articles in the paper. And I thought, why are scientists studying music? And I met Francis Collins, of course, at a very now famous dinner party. And it's led to this project, which has been so extraordinary for me, fulfilling.
Well, I am honored to be a part of it again. And I think maybe we should bring out another scientific mind who spends his time actually thinking about music. Please welcome Professor John Everson.
One note. How does the sound of one note become music? Where does it get its meaning? With that stroke I made, was it an upbeat or a downbeat? My name is John Everson. I'm a research scientist at the University of California. I pull a physicist's love of sound with a neuroscientist's fascination with how our brains create this fantastic internal world from the sounds that we hear. I'd like to share with you tonight my research on how the brain finds meaning in rhythm, which really gets at fundamentals of how perception works. And one theme of tonight, you've probably already gathered, is what a powerful tool music is in understanding mechanisms of the brain. Laurel's talk was fantastic, and I think probably a lot of you want to bounce around now. So let's explore this together. Nietzsche said, with profound insight, we listen to music with our muscles, so let's do that. And as Laurel showed, being in sync with each other brings us closer. So please join me. I'll play for a bit, and then Carol Dashiell, our drummer, will take over. Your job is simply to clap along, stomp, or shout, whatever you'd like. But just keep going, even when I stop, just keep going. Let's go. So. Say. Keep going. Whoa. Whoa. Did you hear that? What just happened? We had a beat going, didn't we? We're in the groove. And then suddenly we heard a new rhythm, and our brain was in disarray as we tried to interpret the new music in terms of the beat. That new pattern was perfectly okay, but it made no sense given our expectations built up from my earlier drumming, and really shows what a powerful lens our sense of beat is in shaping our experience of music. Now, I do want to say, given Laurel's fantastic research on how being in sync makes us like each other and being out of sync doesn't, I want to apologize to our drummer because I actually asked him to do that. It's not his fault. Give him love. So let's step back for a second and analyze what was going on while we synchronized together. In the brain, we can imagine the following circuit that takes sound, which goes in through the ear and creates some kind of auditory perception, of beat perception, which then leads to motor movement in the motor system. And this is the usual way of thinking of things. We have a sensation, we have an action, called bottom up. But we know the aim of the brain is not solely behavior. We have a profound inner life. And I'm deeply concerned with how the brain shapes our inner experience. There's an interesting observation that the motor systems of the brain are very active during listening to rhythm, even when we're not moving. So if we take the movement out of the story, we still have lots of motor activity. And the question is why? Is that simply a sign of unfulfilled movement? We want to move, but we're suppressing it? Or is it something more? So we've hypothesized that, in fact, it is that something more, that perhaps our brain needs motor activity to even understand and process musical rhythm, even without movement. So it's not just that music makes us move, but how we move inside actually enables us to understand music. As a perceptual scientist, this is a radical shift. I'm used to thinking, perception is all auditory. But as a drummer, it's pretty inescapable. I mean, of course. So what we think is that there must be some top-down information flowing from the motor system to the auditory system. Now, the concept of beat is core to understanding this. And we all know what the beat is when we hear it. So Carol is now going to play two rhythms. That's the first. Second. Okay, I think you heard the difference. That first one, repetitive, you could probably all sing it back to me now. That was a rhythm that we say invokes a strong sense of beat. It had a pattern that the brain could understand. And that comes with all sorts of advantages. You saw and listened that you could remember it more easily. The second one was actually the same exact notes, just scrambled around in time. So it didn't have that same pattern. The brain couldn't quite grasp it. And I think I challenge anyone to repeat that verbatim after just one listening. Right? So the beat gives us some advantages. What is the beat? It's simply a regular pulse that defines an origin and a scale for time. As we just saw, having a beat makes a remarkable difference in how we understand rhythms. We interpret what we hear in terms of the beat. Notes dance around and get their meaning by how they relate to the beat. We call this beat-based perception, and as far as we know, it's unique to humans. To really hit that point home, let's stretch this concept of beat a little bit further. We're used to thinking of the beat as being in the music. So we hear the beat, we move, everything's good. But that's not what I mean by beat at all. What I mean is that the beat is actually not in the music, but it's in our head, entirely in our head. Now, we're usually not aware of this because when we hear music, our beat perception is so automatic, and very often composers take pains to guide the listener to hear the beat where they want it to be. And this can be also a source of great playfulness in music. But what about a more ambiguous rhythm, stripped of obvious cues to the beat? For example, and how about just a swing pattern, triplet swing pattern? Okay. So we heard this swing pattern on the cymbal. Okay, we can imagine it like this. It's 2 notes and a rest. Without a bass drum, it's not really clear where the beat falls. And so when this rhythm hits the brain, our brain has to make a decision. Is the beat going to fall on the first note or the second note? If the beat falls on the first note, we get a rhythm like this. You can kind of tap your foot along. Okay, and that has kind of a driving feel to it. Now, what if instead the brain says, no, I think the beat is on the second note? We get a rhythm like this. Okay, and so in our experiments, we use patterns like this, where in fact the rhythm that we hear in the experiment is exactly the same. We prime the listener to hear the beat on the first note or the second note. So let's try that now. What we'll do is we'll play that rhythm with a beat on the first note for 2 measures, and then it'll drop out. And your job is just to maintain that sense of rhythm with that beat on the first note. Okay, let's try it with the second pattern. Thanks. It may be subtle. I don't know if that worked for anyone. But the first has kind of a driving martial feel, and the second has more of an upbeat feel. And so the trick is that enables us to look in the brain and say, okay, in those 2 conditions, the sounds you were hearing are exactly the same. The only thing that was different was where you heard the beat. And so we can use that to try to identify regions of the brain where we think the beat is happening. So this is kind of akin to a visual illusion like this, like the face-face. Again, here the visual stimulus is identical, but if you pay attention to the red color, you see basically a vase. If you pay attention instead to the green color, you'll see 2 faces looking at each other in profile. So again, perception is constructive. What we perceive doesn't just depend on the stimulus that we get, the physics of the situation. It depends on what our brain brings to it and actively participates. So in the experiment that I'll quickly show you now, we have stimuli like this. Okay, very clear. And then we modify that and turn it into 2 different forms. Thanks. So those became progressively groovier, didn't they? More interesting. The thing about that is that rhythm pattern didn't change. All that changed was the relationship between the notes and the beat. Okay, and again, this gives us the ability to look in the brain for parts of the brain that follow the beat. And what we find is this. Here, each dot is shown. This is an experiment using EEG, which Laurel showed you. It measures the brain waves. The red dots are regions of the brain that respond to sound. They care about what the sound is. They don't care about when the beat is. They're like the physics part of the brain, like the tape recorder part of the brain. The blue areas, on the other hand, are areas that care about when that beat occurred. They're keeping track of your internal sense of beat. And if we look on this brain map, we can see that the red areas fall within the area down below called AC, auditory cortex. And the blue ones fall within that upper red area, which is the motor planning cortex. We can see that here. Okay? Now, that's showing us that the beat lives in the motor system. We've taken it a step further to show that really the beat matters. With my colleagues Ramesh Balasubramaniam and Jessica Ross, we've used a technique called TMS to actually try to turn off that motor system. And we've shown that when you do that, it actually does interrupt beat processing. So we think we're really onto showing this hypothesis. So in conclusion from this, beat perception is really something that is a joint activity between the auditory and the motor systems. This has some implications for evolution. You can ask what kinds of brains can hear the beat. And until about 10 years ago, we thought only humans could hear the beat and dance with music, until we came across this guy. And I gather from your reaction that you may have seen him before. This is Snowball, a sulfur-crested cockatoo. And with my colleagues Ani Patel, Micah Bregman, and Irena Schultz, we did some studies which gave us data like this. So Snowball's dancing to the Backstreet Boys. Dances better than me. But what we do, we sped up the music to see if he could follow. And at first he couldn't, but then he figured out a new pattern to move. Snowball. So you might think this is a one-off thing. And what we showed basically is that, very carefully I might add, that as you change the tempo of the music, he changes the tempo of his dancing. But he's not unique. There was a group of Harvard grad students who spent the summer looking at thousands of YouTube videos. Anything with the word animal and dancing. They were looking for dancing dogs, dancing cats, dancing kangaroos. Well, what they found were only 33 examples of really dancing animals that were really in sync with the beat. And 14 out of 15 species were parrots. So think about that for a second. What do we share with parrots? This has started a deluge of research studying what animals can feel the beat, what animals can dance. And there's a little bit of competition between us, like, well, my animal can dance better than your animal. So they got the primate people, they say, yes, ours can do it. But in fact, if we really look at it carefully, we have two categories. We've got animals that can really quite well synchronize with the beat. They can anticipate. They seem to have an internal sense of beat. And we have others that maybe only with great training can they do it. And interestingly, these are our closest relatives, the primates. So we're a little special. But what is characteristic of a lot of the animals, though not all, is that they're vocal learners. And that might be one answer to why we've evolved to be musical and dancers. That the same brain processes involved in vocal learning involve tight connection between the auditory and motor system. And maybe that our musicality is one side effect. Now, that's not the only possibility, but that's one idea. There's still lots of debate and a very interesting story that will keep continuing. But the main point is that the connections in our brain are really what define what we do. And so that may have been the reason why we take evolutionary steps towards music. So now, looking ahead, it's a time of great excitement in the understanding of impact of the music on children's brains and minds. And very quickly, just as a teaser, there's a bunch of sessions tomorrow that Renee is running, Nina Kraus and Laurel are running about music and education. Rhythm has a lot of connections to education. And we've been very fortunate to be working with some NIH-funded studies that are essentially taking the idea of height and weight charts that you might get at the pediatrician and using those to develop growth charts for the brain, trying to understand how music might change the growth of different areas of the brain, which we think will give us a lot of power towards customizing education to really tune up the brain in the future. So with that, I just want to thank you and thank the people without which this research could not have been done, funding by San Diego and Grammy Foundations and the National Science Foundation. And we are so excited to have NIH starting to fund our work. Thank you very much. And thank you to our drummer. So the last two talks have given us some idea of various attributes that have evolved in our understanding of music. So we've had Laurel talking about scene analysis, and I've been talking about the evolution of beat perception. So these may have also served our ancestors in more complex situations, like you might imagine living in a rainforest or a complex environment where you need to place sounds in the environment and understand rhythms. So how better to tie this together than an example using music to evoke the feeling of a rainforest? Renee.
Thank you, Renee.
Yes, yes.
Pleasure to be here tonight.
So I have to tell you, though, a quick story. I met Mickey actually in Chicago, and it wasn't just any meeting. It was the weekend of the final performances of the Grateful Dead. And you're continuing to perform all the time with Dead and Friends, who were featured on Ozark, actually, the other night. I saw that. And yeah, so we went on stage in the stadium, the actual stadium. So there were 50,000 people in the house, as we would say, the house, and there were also 50,000 people outside hanging around. This is a lifestyle now, 4 generations of beautiful families in their tie-dye. And Mickey, on stage with the band, turns to me in the wings and says, "Renee, come on stage. So I crept on. You saw 50,000 people go, "Who is that woman? I want to kill her." And he wanted to show me this spectacular instrument, the beam. Can you tell us about this instrument?
I surely
We were talking
will.
about Pythagoras.
Yes. This is let's talk about Pythagoras. He was an incredible human. Pythagoras lived he lived 550 BC. He lived on an island called Samos, which is off the Greek coast. He was a philosopher. He was a mathematician. But the interesting part of Pythagoras was he conjured the whole universe as a musical instrument, played by the forces of nature. And it came to be that he gave numerical equations to all of the revolving orbs of the planets, and he noticed this heavenly clockwork and how it all worked in rhythm. And then he stretched a string, and he halved it, and it was the octave, the third, the fifth, the seventh, and so on, and hence the tempered scale, and a common language for us to speak as musicians, because now we had A440 as a base of operations. So this instrument here, and this is his name, Pythagoras of Samos, and I could demonstrate it for you if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, now, if Pythagoras was here now, he would have a big, big smile. Now, I'm sure this isn't the monochord that he built, but this is what I call music. So, here we go.
beautiful.
Well, thank you, Pythagoras. Make a big
Well,
hand for
and
Pythagoras.
you're the one who also introduced me to the people that I should talk to in this world of neuroscience and music. And of course, Oliver Sacks was your great friend. Connie Tamino is here somewhere. Thank you, Connie, for the work that you do.
Thank you, Connie.
Yes, and I also find it fascinating that you actually presented to Congress 20 years ago about the power of music therapy. Are there music therapists here tonight? Yes. And so we're really trying to shore this up and make this field as powerful and as well known as it should be across the country.
That was interesting because it was a subcommittee on aging, and it was chaired by Harry Reid. And Oliver and I made the case of music as medicine. And you know what? Harry, he bought it. He gave us $1 million and kind of kick-started this thing here in the West. So
Hurrah.
thank you, Harry.
Yes.
And
so
thank
tell us about this piece that we're going to see tonight about the Amazon. How did you become interested in rhythm in nature?
See, in rhythm and...
In nature, the Amazon piece that we're going to experience in a few minutes.
Okay, what we have here is an extraordinary work. This was a work by our greatest remote recordist, ethnomusicologist, anthropologist, and linguist. Perhaps he's overqualified for everything. His name is Stephen Feld. And what Stephen did, it was 1990 we did it, I think. It was 1990, 91. And what he did is he went over to the New Guinea rainforest and he recorded the whole circadian rhythm, the 24 hours in the cycle of a rainforest. And then he brought it back and we time-elapsed it, let's say folded it over itself and brought it down to 60 minutes. So it was called Voices of the Rainforest, and he won the MacArthur for it in 1990.
Oh, fabulous.
So tonight, Stephen has made us an extraordinary piece of the rainforest. This is Morning Till Dusk. So what Stephen did was we took it from 60 minutes, we took half of the day, and he brought it down to 15 minutes, which we will try to embed ourselves in and make music with the Kululi. The Kululi believe that they are part of the rainforest is part of them. And the birds are the voices of the ancestors. Everything depends on the rainforest, the rhythm of the rainforest. They sing to waterfalls. Everything is about rhythm in the rainforest. So tonight we'll attempt to have some play with the rainforest.
So let me introduce also Zakir Hussain, brilliant, virtuosic tabla player. Zakir, yes.
Maestro Zakir Hussain, please. Now, Zakir and I, we go back a long way, but I hope that this is going to be one of the more positive versions of our interactions.
And Zakir is also an educator. He is also a composer in his own right. In fact, he composed a piece for the NSO here on this stage, which I'm going to go try and find. And we are so fortunate to be able to hear the two of them, rhythm gods, performing together.
The gods, so
yes.
I wouldn't go that far, but we're going to give it a good try.
Rub your fingers together. Everyone.
Sound Health is a new initiative we're exploring with the NIH. Under the leadership of Renee Fleming, who began this dialogue with Dr. Collins, we're really looking to find out how is a creative life a more healthy life.
It's an exciting time in neuroscience. We're starting to learn ways in which music can influence all kinds of other aspects of one's brain function, and especially how we could use that information to use music therapeutically.
When I met Francis Collins, who I discovered was a really terrific musician, it occurred to me this might be an opportunity. If people are, through music therapy, succeeding in helping patients, children with autism, patients with Parkinson's, stroke victims who can then communicate because they can sing but they can't speak, the science of healing in the arts, it's another area of exploding research.
This has a research component to it, it has a presentational component to it, it has an advocacy component to it as well in terms of where culture in America today is going.
Through this initiative, we can all learn from each other and we can move into a new space of integration of deep intellectual and scientific thought.
The fact that this is coming together, that the NIH and the Kennedy Center are collaborating, it makes the arts more relevant. It exalts the importance of the arts in our lives.
John F. Kennedy's vision was to set the artist free, free to reach beyond hallowed halls and sacred walls, into creative, open spaces where audiences can reach back and connect with the art and the artist who created it. That's why we are creating The Reach. The Reach is a living theater where diverse art forms collide to break down the boundaries between audience and art. It is an immersive learning center where communities can reach into the artistic process and discover what it means to make art. It is a public incubator where artists can reach for wherever their visions take them. It is a set of dynamic, collaborative spaces where art happens so close, audiences can reach out and touch it. The Reach is an open stage for differing ideas and divergent cultures, where audiences from all walks of life don't need a ticket to experience art. Inspired by John F. Kennedy, The Reach is our newest and boldest offering in the Kennedy Center's continuing contribution to the human spirit. The Reach, breaking down the boundaries between audience and art.
My interest in creating this project, bringing together the Kennedy Center and the National Institutes of Health, was in amplifying the breadth of the work in research, in childhood development, certainly in therapies. I noticed research coming out about the fact that music has been discovered to be in a lot of parts of the brain, and therefore it engages so much of us. I felt instinctively that not enough people knew about this work. And I also felt that it helps music and the arts maintain a place in society that they really should have.
So, what was it like for you in that brain scanner?
Well, you know, it's an incredible challenge because you're not supposed to move. And it was 2 hours. I was in the machine for 2 hours.
I offered myself as a guinea pig in this fMRI experiment on music, and the test was devised to try and understand how music affects the brain in different ways. So they had me singing, imagining singing, and speaking. I chose something that I thought I could sing 13 times comfortably, and I also chose something that I thought I could have an emotional connection to in an MRI, and it was The Water is Wide.
The water is wide, I cannot cross o'er. And like the hand, I wings to fly. Give me a boat
result, when you look at the pictures, is that different parts of the brain are engaged in all three cases. And surprisingly, imagining singing was the most powerful, had the most engagement. The actual singing piece was easier, but the imagining piece took more effort, a little bit more focus, more intention. There's musical elements, I think we will eventually understand, to have more power over us, whether it's melody, certain harmonies, harmonic tension. Why do we cry in certain music? Why does certain music lift us up, make us feel joy, or inspire us to action? There's a small amount of creativity and improvisation going on in performance because that's the art of interpretation. How am I going to shape this line? How am I going to create a color that is particularly effective in this moment? Or, how will I build the emotional content?
Sound Health is a new initiative we're exploring with the NIH. Under the leadership of Renee Fleming, who began this dialogue with Dr. Collins, we're really looking to find out how is a creative life a more healthy life.
It's an exciting time in neuroscience. We're starting to learn ways in which music can influence all kinds of other aspects of one's brain function, and especially how we could use that information to use music therapeutically.
When I met Francis Collins, who I discovered was a really terrific musician, it occurred to me this might be an opportunity. If people are, through music therapy, succeeding in helping patients, children with autism, patients with Parkinson's, stroke victims who can then communicate because they can sing but they can't speak, the science of healing in the arts, it's another area of exploding research.
This has a research component to it, it has a presentational component to it, it has an advocacy component to it as well in terms of where culture in America today is going.
Through this initiative, we can all learn from each other and we can move into a new space of integration of deep intellectual and scientific thought.
The fact that this is coming together, that the NIH and the Kennedy Center are collaborating, it makes the arts more relevant. It exalts the importance of the arts in our lives.
John F. Kennedy's vision was to set the artist free. Free to reach beyond hallowed halls and sacred walls, into creative, open spaces where audiences can reach back and connect with the art and the artist who created it. That's why we are creating The Reach. The Reach is a living theater, where diverse art forms collide to break down the boundaries between audience and art. It is an immersive learning center where communities can reach into the artistic process and discover what it means to make art. It is a public incubator where artists can reach for wherever their visions take them. It is a set of dynamic, collaborative spaces where art happens so close, audiences can reach out and touch it. The Reach is an open stage for differing ideas and divergent cultures, where audiences from all walks of life don't need a ticket to experience art. Inspired by John F. Kennedy, The Reach is our newest and boldest offering in the Kennedy Center's continuing contribution to the human spirit. The Reach, breaking down the boundaries between audience and art.
Oh, Shannon Dove, I long to hear you.
My interest in creating this project, bringing together the Kennedy Center and the National Institutes of Health, was in amplifying the breadth of the work in research, in childhood development, certainly in therapies. I noticed research coming out about the fact that music has been discovered to be in a lot of parts of the brain, and therefore it engages so much of us. I felt instinctively that not enough people knew about this work. And I also felt that it helps music and the arts maintain a place in society that they really should have.
So, what was it like for you in that brain scanner?
Well, you know, it's an incredible challenge because you're not supposed to move. And it was 2 hours. I was in the machine for 2 hours.
I offered myself as a guinea pig in this fMRI experiment on music, and the test was devised to try and understand how music affects the brain in different ways. So they had me singing, imagining, singing, and speaking. I chose something that I thought I could sing 13 times comfortably, and I also chose something that I thought I could have an emotional connection to in an MRI, and it was The Water is Wide.
The water is wide. I cannot cross on. And like the I wings to fly. Give me a boat that can carry me to.
The result, when you look at the pictures, is that different parts of the brain are engaged in all three cases. And surprisingly, imagining singing was the most powerful, had the most engagement. The actual singing piece was easier, but the imagining piece took more effort. a little bit more focus, more intention. There's musical elements, I think we will eventually understand, to have more power over us, whether it's melody, certain harmonies, harmonic tension. You know, why do we cry in certain music? Why does certain music lift us up, make us feel joy, or inspire us to action? There's a small amount of creativity and improvisation going on in performance because that's the art of interpretation. You know, how am I going to shape this line? How am I going to create a color that is particularly effective in this moment? Or, you know, how will I build the emotional content?
Hearing a lot about rhythm. Are there any songs about rhythm, Renee?
I think there are a couple, actually. Let's see if we can pick them out tonight.
Well, let's see if we can make this one happen.
Got a little rhythm, a rhythm, a rhythm that pitter-pats through my brain. So darn persistent, the day isn't distant when it'll drive me insane. Comes in the morning without any warning and hangs around all day. I'll have to sneak up to it, someday I'll speak up to it. I hope it listens when I say, fascinating rhythm, you got me on the go. Fascinating rhythm, I'm all a quiver.
What a mess you're making. The neighbors want to know why I'm always shaking just like a flivver.
Each morning I get up with the sun, start hopping, never stopping, to find at night no work has been done. I know that once it didn't matter, but now you're doing wrong. When you start to patter, I'm so unhappy.
Well, won't you take a day off, decide to run along somewhere far away off and make it snappy?
Oh, how I long to be the gal I used to be. Fascinating rhythm, oh, won't you stop picking on me?
welcome again Sanjay Gupta.
That was amazing.
A little bit of swing, you know. I just feel like we're leaving you out in the singing department. You want to sing a duet with me?
Oh no, nobody wants that. My wife is here.
Dr. Collins.
She doesn't want that.
He did real well.
I want to stay married.
Do it, man.
So, no, you guys are great though. That was amazing, and you've given me memories to last a lifetime. Thank you very much.
You didn't say what kind of memories, but thank you anyway.
It was really amazing. You've seen a lot tonight already. Music is in and of itself a form of language. That's something I hope you've taken away from this so far. Professor Nina Kraus is going to be joined by Zakir Hussain again, who provided the soundtrack to my childhood, seemingly. And they're going to talk more about the intersection of music, language, and the healthy brain.
Hello. I'm Nina Kraus. I'm a professor at Northwestern University, a biologist. My mother was a pianist, and I grew up playing under the piano because it felt good to be under there. And I grew up in a household where more than one language was spoken. I learned Italian first. In italiano si mostra il ritmo con le mani. I don't feel as though I fit in as an Italian or an American, but I'm most comfortable across boundaries. And I feel that way scientifically as well, which is why I like to take science out of the laboratory and into schools and the gym, which I'm going to tell you about. First, there is rhythm in language. As I'm talking to you now, there is rhythm in my voice. The drums are playing it too. We are here to celebrate the power of rhythm. So we've known for a long time that kids who are good at synchronizing to a beat have better language skills. So here's a kid. Synchronizing to a beat. Here's another guy. Enthusiastic. But as a scientist, I am always asking what is going on in the brain. So you can see the sound waves, and the sound waves have rhythms. And we can measure the brain's response to sound with scalp electrodes. And we can see, look at that red squiggly line. That's the response of the synchronizer. And you can see that the synchronizer is following the rhythms of the sound waves, whereas the non-synchronizer is not. And what is important is the fact that the synchronizer has better language skills. So, tomorrow, there is going to be a whole workshop on rhythm. It's called Say It With Rhythm, so be there. It'll be wonderful. Zakir will be there, and Mickey Hart and Adam Gasly. But let's think about sound and making sense of sound as a measure of brain health. Now, making sense of sound is one of the hardest jobs that we ask our brain to do. So it means that we need to process information on the order of microseconds, which is faster than neurons even fire. And so you can imagine that our experiences are going to affect this sound processing. The experiences can be making music. Making music affects sound processing in the brain, and also getting hit in the head. So a concussion can very much affect sound processing in the brain. So think of sound processing in the brain as a fabulous measure of brain health. So again, biologist, I measure sound processing in the brain, and over the years we have measured sound processing in the brain of many musicians and athletes who have sustained a concussion. So how do we even measure sound processing in the brain? Well, you have to deliver a sound wave to the ear, and then the red squiggle is the brain's response to a complex sound. Now, just as visual objects have a color, a taste, a color, a texture, a size, so sound also has ingredients. And these ingredients are like pitch and timing and timbre. And we can see how good a job the brain does at processing these different ingredients of sound. So let's focus on pitch and timing and timbre. What's pitch? Well, pitch is how high or low a note is. Then there is timing. And timbre gives us the sound of different instruments playing the same note. So the pitch is the same, but they sound different because the harmonics are different, the timbre is different of each instrument. So we can measure sound processing in the brain, and I have to tell you that as a biologist who is used to recording from single neurons in the brain, I have been driven to try to develop ways of measuring sound processing in the brain in humans with the kind of accuracy and precision that we can find at the cellular level. And we've made some progress. So a sound wave comes in to the ear, and then we measure the electricity. And you can see that the sound wave and the brain wave physically resemble each other. In fact, so much that you can take the brain wave and play it out through a speaker, and it will sound like the sound wave. So here's the sound wave. Here's the brain's response. So how is this even possible? How can we listen to how the brain listens? So imagine you're playing an instrument, and this is the movement of air molecules producing sound, and we're all used to the idea of translating sound waves into electricity through a microphone, and then we can play that through a speaker. We can then listen to those sound waves, and the currency of the nervous system is electricity. So with scalp electrodes, we can measure the brain's response to sound, and we now have an electrical signal which we can play through a speaker. So let me give you some examples. Sound waves and brain waves. First, you will hear a Rhodes piano playing funky music, and then you will hear the brain responding to those very notes. The brain. So we have a lot to work with. Let's hear some Beatles. First, some piano. The brain. Heart and soul, and the brain. My all-time favorite. And here is Renee. So Renee will sing a few bars of the sound of music, and the last 3 words will be the response of the brain to her voice. So we can measure the brain's response to a beautiful voice like that. I want you to hear a musically enhanced brain playing Amazing Grace. And now you will hear Amazing Grace played through a brain that has sustained a concussion. So again, we have a lot to work with to learn about sound processing in the brain and brain health. Let's talk about healthy brains. Probably the healthiest thing we can do for our brains is to make music. So, a question. Yeah. And, again, as a biologist, what is going on in the brain? So, a question that's often asked is, are musicians made or born? So, a way of looking at this is to take 2 matched groups. So, say, take a classroom of 2nd graders and match them age, sex, IQ, and how their language skills are, their sound processing in the brain, and then give one group music and another group another enrichment activity. So we've been able to do this longitudinally in 2 populations. In Chicago Public Schools, we've followed freshmen to their senior years, the same kids, and in Los Angeles, the Harmony Project, we followed 2nd, 3rd, and 4th graders. So, these are the same kids that we're able to follow their development of their brain activity over time. And here are some of the beautiful kids who have been part of our studies. And what we found is that the children who had music, who were given music instruction, had stronger language skills. Their reading was better. Their ability to hear speech in challenging listening environments, like a playground, was better. Their brain development was faster. And importantly, their response to sound was more accurate. So that little red splotch that you see there is the timing difference, the calculation that the brain has to do when it's comparing consonants like ba and da. Did I say bad or dad? And you can see that after 2 years of music making, there's more red, so there's a greater automatic timing difference. The brain can discriminate these sounds automatically much better, and these are not changes that we saw in the control group. Importantly, so we've been talking about pitch, timing, and timbre. The musician's signature really consists of enhancement in timing and in timbre. And what is remarkable about this is that this is the same signature that underlies language. So kids who have developmental language disorders are likely to have timing difficulties in their response to sound or difficulty processing the harmonics. You need to have timbre and timing for language. Language experience matters. So a number of years ago, studies were done showing that children whose moms had less education were likely to hear fewer words than kids whose moms had more education. And what we did is we went into high school and just took a classroom and divided the kids based on how much education their mothers had. And what we discovered was that the kids whose moms had less education had responses to sound that were less precise and strong. And importantly, they had more neural noise. So if you can imagine you're trying to make sense of sound, you can think about like you're listening to a radio and there's static in the radio, and on top of it, the announcer's voice is going whistle. So how is a child to learn? So we understand that there is a certain linguistic signature involving different ingredients of sound processing that is hampered by linguistic deprivation. And we asked, well, could music making strengthen that? And the fact is that it partially offset this effect of linguistic deprivation, showing us that music can really strengthen skills in the brain that are important for language. Importantly, it takes time to shape the brain. In both of our studies, we saw that after 1 year, we saw no changes in the brain's response to sound, but after 2 years, these changes were evident. Importantly, these changes happen, many of us play a musical instrument for some time and then stop, but that influence of music education lasts. And so as we get older, as we've learned to listen better through playing a musical instrument, if you can see the response there of a typical older brain, someone who has played music all their life, or even who has had a history of music making, will have a biological response that will resemble that of a younger brain. So, what about when things go wrong? So, concussion. Concussion can disrupt the hearing brain. And we are interested in learning more about this so that we can better inform diagnosis of concussion, when it's safe for an athlete to return to play or return to learn, back to the classroom, treatment outcomes. Here are some of the participants in our studies. We've been following the Northwestern football players for the last 2 years, and here they are getting their brain responses measured. And I show you their pictures. I think they are adorable. Again, what is going on in their brains? So what is going on is in the acute stages of concussion, so right after they've sustained a concussion within 24, 48 hours, what we see is that the disruption in sound processing is pervasive. You should know that most concussions resolve after a week. In the kids who maintain symptoms continuously, beyond that time, we see that disruptions in sound processing continue. And even in some athletes who have recovered, we see that there is a legacy of their history of concussion. So importantly, we have secured a grant from the National Institutes of Health, and we are now studying all 500 Northwestern University athletes, boys and girls, in high and low impact sports, longitudinally over 5 years, and so by next year we should have some more information. So there are very important parallels between music and physical fitness. And the idea is that this should be for every child. Think about how physical education is handled in schools. It really is just the kids who are good at sports, the kids who make varsity, who get the good coaching. But every child should be strong and flexible. This strikes a family history chord. I'm reminded of my Uncle Hans, who published work decades ago showing that children in America were less strong and flexible than their counterparts in other countries. And at that time, he was working together with the Presidential Council of Physical Fitness, at that time under President Kennedy. And he was really, the idea was to develop standards standards of fitness for every child, and many of these ideas perished with the president. But there are parallels as we think about music education as well, because not every child is going to become a musician, and yet every child should develop musical knowledge. So I guess I would say to you, as a scientist, speaking as a scientist, the information tells us that it is important that we put our resources into music education for every child so that they can develop strong and healthy brains. So finally, we have Science Meets Art. Here is the brain keyboard, and we have recorded the brain's response to every note on the keyboard. Can you play a couple notes for us? So this is the brain's response to individual notes, and now you will hear Mark Meadows play the brain. Thank you. Thank you.
I am learning a ton. I mean, I just really love this stuff. How about another round of applause for all of our scientists?
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think it is safe to say, and I think you've seen now, music and the mind are intertwined in a way that maybe you hadn't thought about before. The next logical question, I think where the discussion has to go from here, is what exactly is happening in the brain of someone who is creating music?
Well, fortunately, we have someone who can absolutely, literally show us. Please welcome otolaryngologist Dr. Charles Lim.
Good evening. It's such a pleasure to be here. So, we've learned a lot about how the brain perceives sound, but we have not really turned our attention to how the brain produces a new idea. My name is Charles Lim. I'm a hearing specialist and an ear surgeon at the University of California, San Francisco, and I run a lab that studies the neural basis of creativity. The dilemma is kind of simple. If we think about our artistic geniuses, the musicians we revere, the ones that changed our lives, there are a lot of things that we can do to try to understand them. We can listen to their music, we can think about their lives, we can wonder what they were feeling, we can think about their stories. What I think about is, how were they able to actually be so creative? What happened inside this brain inside their head? Now, for a moment, I just want to impress upon you this idea that the brain is not an abstract entity. Life is abstract. Love, feelings, experiences, these are subjective things that are filtered through this physical reality of a brain that we all have inside our skulls. And because this is a real physical functioning organ, even your consciousness, the fact that you are aware of me speaking to you tonight, is all filtered through this organ that's allowing you to perceive that. Now, when we think about art and genius, the statement that this really naturally leads to is that musical genius is a neurologic product that can be examined using rigorous scientific methods. And I just want to make a plug for science here. We are not into alternative facts. We prefer objective measures and data. Now, I'm going to explain one of these objective measures, and this is functional MRI scanning. So some of you have probably had an MRI scan. I hope not, but probably some of you have had it. It's a big magnet. Your head goes inside it. Now, Normally, you take a high-resolution picture of your brain, but it doesn't have to be that way. You could also, rather than take a picture, you could look at blood flow. You could say, hey, this part of my brain is active. And when that part of my brain is active, there's more blood going to that area, and it's consuming more and more oxygen. The oxyhemoglobin is changing into deoxyhemoglobin, which can be detected by a big magnet. Therefore, in this machine, your brain can tell you real time, this area is active, and it's being picked up by this big magnet, which can then tell you where it happened. That's the genius behind fMRI. It's something called blood oxygen level dependent imaging. Now, in the end, you don't get an anatomic picture like you see there on the left. You get a statistical cluster, a likelihood that that's probably where something happened in the brain when an event occurred. So I'm going to show you a very special piano keyboard. This is a special keyboard because it took me 2 years to make. The reason it took me 2 years to make is because it has no magnetic metal in it. Why is that good? Because we can use it inside an fMRI scanner. Now, everybody should have one of these. Now, through this collaboration between the NIH and the Kennedy Center, I had the really fantastic fortune of meeting a tremendous young man. He was born visually impaired, and he can play music like you have not believed. And what we did was actually brought him to my lab at the University of California, San Francisco, and we scanned his brain. So I'm going to show you a movie that discusses how we did that.
This is the grand hallway to the scanner.
Right. I am Matthew Whitaker, and I am a musician. I am 17 years old, and I am also visually impaired.
So today we want to see what's happening in Matthew's brain while he's doing a variety of things. One was playing a blues, and one was playing a song that he'll play for the Kennedy Center tonight, and another was listening to music that he liked and maybe listening to something that wasn't as interesting. And lastly, he's having a musical conversation with another musician to see what's happening when two players have a dialogue together, sort of a wordless conversation that's just based on music. The entire time, you're going to be in the scanner room. We're going to be in the control room about maybe 10 feet away from you, but separated by a glass window and a door.
Is it like a recording studio, like control room?
It's sort of like a recording studio. So the goal is to understand the neural underpinnings for something as complex, wonderful, and mysterious as music. I mean, we have a lot of scientific knowledge about how the world works, but relatively little knowledge about how the brain enables the arts. Art has been around throughout eternity. As long as there's been humans, there have been art. Every culture, every historical epoch, there's always been art. And so what I'm trying to understand is how can we use the arts to sort of unravel this complex neural circuitry that gives rise to new ideas.
Technology, has come really far, I liked how it just kind of analyzed, musically what I was, thinking of, and I wonder, what the results will be.
In the end, it seems that humans are hardwired to create, and that may be linked to how humans actually survive.
Please join me in welcoming the great Matthew Whitaker. That's why we love music. So while he was in the scanner, we did some things to Matthew. We had him listen to some lectures.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? The tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which...
Now, when we looked at his brain activity, listening to that lecture, it was interesting. He had auditory cortex lighting up because there's certainly sound. He had left lateral prefrontal cortex lighting up because there's certainly language involved. He had medial prefrontal cortex lighting up. That's a default area when you're not doing anything. I suspect he was zoning out. And we also looked at his visual cortex, the area normally that subserves sight, and not a lot of activity. Then we switched the soundtrack from Matthew to Snarky Puppy. Now, this was his brain during the lecture. This is his brain on music. So we see here that music stimulates his entire brain. Yes, there's language areas, there's sensory motor areas, but take a look at this. Visual cortex. In Matthew's visually impaired. His brain has figured out to use this area of the brain that normally is preserved for vision, for the good stuff, for music. And so when Matthew's listening to music, he's indeed using the neuroplasticity of his brain has figured out a way to convert this visual cortex into an auxiliary auditory processing area. And so it's a pretty unique finding. So, Matthew, we've been kind of dissecting your brain without your permission here. You want to comment a little bit on what you think either about, he doesn't know about these findings, we just did this. What do you think about the experience of doing this brain scan for us?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Dr. Charles, for doing this with me, and this is a wonderful experiment. Thank you so much. But I really enjoyed myself. It was really fun and really interesting. You know, at first I was nervous because I didn't know what to expect, but after knowing how everything was working and how everything was hooked up to me, but it was really cool. I loved it. It was so much fun. Thank you so much.
Well,
Thank you.
Well, thanks for volunteering for my next study. I appreciate it. So now it can't all just be about jazz, right? There's so many different kinds of creativity in this world. And what I want to do is talk to you about a different kind of musical creativity that's maybe related to jazz. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Anthony Veneziali to the stage. He's the founder of Freestyle Love Supreme and the Chief Creative Officer for Speechless. Good. Now, as you might have guessed, Anthony is a mad freestyler. He's going to start by doing a little rap that he composed when he was in 10th grade.
Yeah, sure. So Charles always loves to have, the control. And so this is the control. In 10th grade, I wrote a song for my math class final exam, which of course you would write a math song for a math exam. And so it was to fit as many math terms into one song as possible. So my friend Jay Flatt and I took the song "It's the End of the World as We Know It" by REM and changed it to "It's the End of the Year, so don't blow it." And here's the first little snippet from that. So imagine that beautiful REM Michael Stipe voice. That's great, it starts with a headache, line graphs and coordinate planes. Math class makes me so afraid. How did we ever learn 500 million math terms, modes and arithmetic means, polar graphs and extremes, calculate the rocket speed, D over T, the triangle area equals 1/2 base height. Mr. Bon Giovanni put me closer to the chalkboard, but my grades are getting higher and I'm losing my sight. So that goes on for another 3 verses. First song I ever wrote, 10th grade, and I remember every single word of it, and I probably haven't looked at that song in 20 years. Weird. So that's one version. That's the control, that sort of rote memorization. We did it over and over and over again. And then there's the other.
Now, for those of you that don't know how freestyle works, basically, we're going to come up with words, and Anthony's going to rap and rhyme them. Okay? And he's not aware of what words are going to be because you're going to tell me them right now. Okay, so I'm going to take 5 words. I'm going to take one word from this section. Yes? Polaroids. Okay, I'll take a word from this section.
Ooh, nice millennial. I didn't even know they knew what that was.
Sorry, what was that, sir? Expiration. Polaroids?
Inspiration.
Oh, inspiration. Expiration's worse, yes. Inspiration, yes. Okay, and then one about from this side. Amygdala.
Yes.
Got it.
Boom.
Maybe another one from this side. Peanut butter.
Ooh,
okay.
Nice.
And then another one from this side. What was that? Puppy. Puppy. Okay, so.
So sweet.
I don't know that I'm going to remember all
Remind us of
this.
the words. We had puppy, inspiration.
Peanut butter.
Peanut butter.
Amygdala. We should know that one.
Obviously.
And puppy.
And Polaroid.
And Polaroid, yes.
And Polaroid. Great.
Okay.
So what are we going to start with, Charles?
And your first word is puppy.
All right, just like a fish, I ain't no guppy, but this man here loves the song Snarky Puppy. All right, check it out as we bring it on back. I woof, 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 and then I'm on the attack. Cause why did that puppy wanna pee on me? I don't know, his medulla, or maybe oblongata medulla, or maybe I'm a fooler for having any reasons and treasons. And Charles told me the next word reason. The next word's Polaroid. All right, yes, like a land camera. I can't just feel like I took all my Rolaids. Polaroid, oh my gosh, I use that Polaroid to take these pictures and shake, shake, shake them. Like Outkast said, yes, I'm gonna make them. Up on the spot, I'm working right now. My brain's running fast and oh, how now?
Peanut butter.
Yeah, alright, thank you, Washington Carver, for what you do. Making it, mashing it, smashing it up. Cause peanut butter always is in my cup. That's Reese's, Pieces, alright, I got a thesis that I'm gonna share with you later on. And what's the next word? Oh, perfect, because you should know there's no expiration on the word inspiration. And my soul right now may go backdated. Yes, it made it. It ain't a Twinkie, but it'll probably last until I lose my pinky. Yes, of course. We save the best for last. And yes, I ain't gonna do this in reverse or twist my torso. I'm just looking for the lateral that's dorsal or prefrontal. Alright, yes, my medulla and oblongata. Okay, now I'm going under to the next refrain. And yes, we're gonna stop now because I don't understand what's happening in my brain. So what just happened, Charles?
I have no idea. No, we sort of know, okay? So we actually did freestyle rap in the fMRI scanner, and this is how it works. We've got a fiber optic noise canceling microphone. We have a rapper who's going to do something memorized and something freestyle.
It's a manual in the scanner. He just memorized a rhyme for us.
Here's a memorized rap. Hands are like this. That's to avoid this.
Search for the truth in this eternal quest. I'm passion, not fashion, you can see I'm dressed. Psychopath voices in my head appear. Whisper these lyrics only I can hear.
Listen carefully.
Discovering that which is hovering inside the mind of those unconfined. All these words be pouring out like rain. I need a mad scientist to check my brain. Stop.
He just said, I need a mad scientist to check my brain. And he came to the right lab. So if we look at the brain activity, we can do a comparison, what's called a contrast, and we see, actually, the creative brain is very different than the memorized brain in some key ways. First of all, language areas are lighting up. They're lighting up when you're doing a memorized rap, but they're really lighting up when you're improvising the rap. Meanwhile, there's this conscious self-monitoring area up front that is suppressing itself. It's turning itself off to allow the flow of novel, unimpeded ideas. And so these may be some of the neural signatures associated with spontaneous creativity, at least in an amazing expert. So before we let Matthew and Anthony take it out, I would like to just say that, creativity in its highest forms exists in the arts, in the sciences. And this whole collaboration is about seeing how these two crowning human achievements can inform each other. For myself, what do I hope from all of this? That maybe one day we'll make better, more creative humans. Thank you.
funky in my brain. Yeah, I couldn't contain. It's so funky in my brain. I couldn't contain. Yeah, it's so funky in my brain. I couldn't contain. It's so funky in my brain. I couldn't contain. Check it out. I want you to bounce with it. Bounce with it just like babies do. Or maybe even a soulful crested cockatoo. Alright, who knew that we could be so connected and understanding and even blended? Or maybe we could just be best friended by the end of this evening, cause we were believing and listen to the syncopation of all evening long. Alright, everybody going still strong. And now I'm gonna wrap it up from what happened on to the evening. Sanjay was on the stage, Renee singing in a rainforest rage. It's so crazy, going oh yeah. Alright everybody, what's up here? I hope I never get concussion, cause I love crystal clear music, not no fuzzy cousin. But anyway, I'm still up here and trying to find the right words to sound clear. Cause up here, it's so funky, and I hope it is for you. Yeah, so much up in my brain, I just couldn't contain. So funky in my brain, and you too, you couldn't contain. Is it funky in your brain? Well, please don't refrain. Let it spill out, let it happen too, cause maybe you shouldn't contain it. Come on. Woo! Oh, that's the funk I'm waiting for. Come on, Matthew, I want some more. Ha! hope you can see under here as well, cause his feet are playing like a bat out of hell. You got so much funk in your brain, you shouldn't contain. You got so much funk in your brain, you couldn't contain. You couldn't contain. So much funk in your brain. I think a brain, a brain. Give it up for Matthew Whitaker. Let's hear it for the band as well.
You know, Albert Einstein once declared that if I were not a physician or physicist, I'd probably be a musician. I often think in music. I live my daydreams in music. I see my life in terms of music. Like the muses of yore who united the arts and sciences, tonight we have seen how vital it is that each fires the other. These seemingly disparate disciplines are like the neurons in our brains, inextricably connected in this wonderful web of inspiration.
So scientists can think in music just as much as musicians can use the scientific method to improve and refine their work. As we continue to ask fundamental questions about life and the mind, let us never forget the words of the great Ella Fitzgerald, who said, "The only thing better than singing is more singing." Thank you, everybody.